There's a woman right now, maybe watching this at 2 in the morning, maybe sitting in a parked car outside her own house, maybe staring at the ceiling while everyone else sleeps, and she's trying to understand why her hands won't stop shaking, why her chest feels tight for no reason, why a wave of dread washes over her in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She has no history of anxiety, no trauma, no obvious trigger. She was fine 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, and now suddenly, without warning, without permission, something inside her shifted, and she doesn't know what it is or how to make it stop. If that woman is you, I need you to stay right here, because what I'm about to explain is something that should have been told to you years ago. It should have been explained by every professional you've ever sat across from. It should be printed in bold letters on every health pamphlet handed to women over 40. But it isn't. And the reason it isn't is one of the great failures of modern health education. Because what you're experiencing, this sudden, unexplainable anxiety that appeared out of nowhere after 40, is not a mental illness. It is not a personality change. It is not stress. It is not burnout. And it is absolutely, categorically, not just in your head. It is biological. It is hormonal. It is measurable. And it has a name that most women don't hear until they've already spent months or years suffering in silence, questioning their own sanity. Let me walk you through exactly what is happening inside your body right now, because once you understand the mechanism, everything, the panic, the dread, the racing thoughts, the sleeplessness, the feeling that something is terribly wrong but you can't name it, all of it suddenly makes sense. And more importantly, it becomes something you can actually address. Here's what nobody explained. Your brain runs on a delicate chemical orchestra: serotonin, dopamine, GABA, norepinephrine. These neurotransmitters regulate everything from your mood to your ability to handle stress, from your sleep cycles to your capacity to feel calm in your own skin. For decades, these chemicals operated in a balance that you never had to think about. You didn't wake up in the morning and consciously decide to feel stable. Your brain did it for you, automatically, silently, efficiently. But here's the part that changes everything. That entire system, that beautifully calibrated chemical balance, was being quietly supervised by one hormone that most women associate only with reproduction: estrogen. And when I say supervised, I don't mean it played a minor supporting role. I mean estrogen was the conductor of the entire orchestra. It regulated how much serotonin your brain produced. It influenced how sensitive your GABA receptors were. GABA being the neurotransmitter most directly responsible for feelings of calm and safety. It modulated dopamine pathways. It kept cortisol, your primary stress hormone, from spiraling out of control. It was, in every meaningful sense, the chemical architect of your emotional stability. And sometime after 40, for some women earlier, for some later, that conductor starts leaving the stage, not all at once, not in a clean, predictable decline, in chaotic, unpredictable surges and crashes that can change week to week, day to day, sometimes hour to hour. One morning your estrogen levels are near normal. By evening they've dropped by half. The next day they spike. The day after they plummet again. This is perimenopause, and your brain, your beautiful, complex, finely tuned brain, has absolutely no idea how to cope with it. What happens next is not a mystery. It is a neurochemical emergency. When estrogen drops suddenly, serotonin production decreases with it. Less serotonin means your mood regulation system loses power. When estrogen fluctuates unpredictably, GABA receptor sensitivity changes. And suddenly, The neurochemical brake pedal that used to slow down your stress response stops working properly. Your brain can't calm itself down the way it used to. Meanwhile, without estrogen buffering cortisol, your stress hormone begins to rise unchecked. And cortisol doesn't just make you feel stressed, it puts your entire nervous system into a state of hypervigilance. Your amygdala, the threat detection center of your brain, goes into overdrive. It starts interpreting neutral situations as dangerous. It creates a sense of dread that has no logical source. It generates physical symptoms, racing heart, tight chest, tingling hands, shallow breathing, that mimic a panic attack so perfectly that millions of women end up in emergency rooms convinced they're having a heart attack. And here's the tragedy. When those women arrive at the emergency room, when they sit in front of a professional and say, "I don't know what's happening to me. I've never felt this way before. Something is wrong," they are overwhelmingly met with the same response: stress, anxiety disorder, depression. Here's a prescription. Come back in 6 weeks. Nobody asks about their hormones. Nobody asks when their last period was. Nobody asks if they've noticed changes in their cycle, their sleep, their body temperature, their ability to concentrate. Nobody connects the dots between a 43-year-old woman's sudden onset of crippling anxiety and the massive hormonal upheaval happening inside her body. And so she leaves with a diagnosis that doesn't fit, a medication that wasn't designed for what she's actually experiencing, and a growing suspicion that something deeper is going on. But no one seems willing or able to tell her what it is. I have seen this pattern hundreds of times. Hundreds. And every single time, the story is almost identical. A woman who was confident, capable, emotionally grounded. A woman who handled stress like a professional, who raised children, managed careers, navigated relationships, dealt with loss, and did it all without ever feeling this particular kind of fear, suddenly finds herself unable to drive on the highway, unable to sit through a meeting without her heart racing, unable to fall asleep without a sense of impending doom so heavy it feels like a physical weight on her chest, unable to recognize herself. One woman I worked with, I'll call her Karen, described it in a way that has stayed with me for years. She said, "It's not that I'm afraid of something. It's that I'm afraid of everything and nothing at the same time. It's like my body decided to be terrified and forgot to tell my mind why." That description, that disconnect between physical terror and rational understanding, is the hallmark of hormonally driven anxiety. And it is fundamentally different from the anxiety that most treatment protocols are designed to address. Traditional anxiety responds to cognitive behavioral techniques. You identify the thought, you challenge it, you replace it. But hormonal anxiety doesn't start with a thought. It starts with a chemical signal. Your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline before your mind even has a chance to form a worry. The fear arrives first. The thoughts come after, scrambling to justify a feeling that was never cognitive in the first place. That's why so many women in this situation feel frustrated with conventional approaches. It's not that those approaches don't work. It's that they're treating the wrong layer of the problem. Think of it this way. If your house was flooding because a pipe burst in the basement, you wouldn't solve the problem by mopping the kitchen floor. You'd go find the pipe. The pipe, in this case, is the hormonal disruption. And until it's addressed, until someone acknowledges that the foundation of your emotional architecture is being restructured from the inside, no amount of surface-level intervention is going to make the water stop rising. This is exactly why I spent so long searching for something that addresses what's actually happening at the root, not just managing the symptoms, but helping women understand and work with what their bodies are going through. After years of research and working directly with women in this transition, I found something that I believe can genuinely make a difference. I've left it in the first link in the description and in the pinned comment. If anything I'm saying resonates with you, I encourage you to take a look, not as a miracle cure, but as a real step toward clarity. Now let me tell you something that most women in this situation desperately need to hear, because it changes the entire emotional landscape of this experience. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not losing your mind. Your brain is doing exactly what a brain does when its primary regulatory hormone starts behaving unpredictably. It is adapting in real time to a chemical environment it was never designed for. The anxiety you feel is not a sign that something is wrong with your character. It is a sign that your neurochemistry is being reorganized, painfully, chaotically, but temporarily. Temporarily. That word matters more than you know right now, because one of the cruelest aspects of this kind of anxiety is the way it convinces you that this is permanent, that this is who you are now, that the woman you were before, the one who could handle anything, who didn't flinch, who slept soundly and woke up without dread, that woman is gone forever. She is not gone. She is buried under a hormonal avalanche. And when the avalanche settles, and it will settle, she will still be there. Changed, perhaps. Wiser, certainly, but still fundamentally her. Let me tell you about another woman I worked with. I'll call her Priya. Priya was an executive who had managed teams of 50 people, traveled internationally for work, and prided herself on being unflappable. At 46, she started having panic attacks in airport security lines. Within 3 months, she couldn't fly at all. Within 6 months, she had stopped going to the office. She told me she felt like an imposter in her own life, like someone had replaced her brain while she was sleeping and given her one that couldn't handle basic tasks. When we explored her timeline together, when we mapped her symptoms against her hormonal changes, the picture was stunningly clear. Every escalation of her anxiety corresponded to a documented hormonal shift. The brain fog started when her progesterone began dropping. The insomnia began when her estrogen became erratic. The panic attacks started during a period when both hormones were in freefall. Her body wasn't malfunctioning. It was responding, loudly, desperately, unmistakably, to a biological event that no one had told her to expect. Priya's story is not unusual. It is, in fact, so common that it should be considered standard health education for every woman approaching 40. But it isn't, and the gap between what women experience and what they're told to expect remains one of the most significant blind spots in modern health understanding. Women are taught about puberty. They're taught about pregnancy. They're prepared for labor, for postpartum changes, for the emotional shifts of new motherhood. But perimenopause, this seismic, years-long hormonal transition that affects every system in the body, is treated as an afterthought. A footnote. Something to deal with when you get there. And by the time you get there, you've already spent months or years thinking you're falling apart. I want to address something else that happens during this transition that amplifies the anxiety exponentially, and that is the isolation. Because anxiety during perimenopause doesn't just affect how you feel, it changes how you relate to every person in your life. You stop accepting invitations because you're afraid of having a panic attack in public. You stop confiding in friends because you can't find words for what you're experiencing. You pull away from your partner because the effort of explaining something you don't understand yourself feels impossible. And slowly, invisibly, you build a world that gets smaller every week. The isolation feeds the anxiety. The anxiety feeds the isolation. And the cycle accelerates until you're living in a space so constricted that your entire existence revolves around managing the next wave of panic. I've seen brilliant, vibrant, deeply connected women shrink their lives down to a handful of rooms because the outside world became too overwhelming. Not because they were fragile, not because they lacked courage, because their neurochemistry was in chaos, and nobody gave them the map to navigate it. Here is the map, or at least the beginning of one. First, understand that what you're experiencing has a biological basis. This alone, this single piece of knowledge, can reduce anxiety by a measurable degree. Research has shown that when women understand the hormonal mechanisms behind their symptoms, their stress response decreases, not because the hormones change, but because the narrative changes. You go from "something is wrong with me" to "something is happening to me, and I understand what it is." That shift, from confusion to comprehension, is profoundly calming. Second, track your cycle if you still have one, and track your symptoms regardless. When you begin to see the patterns, when you notice that your worst anxiety consistently appears in the second half of your cycle, or during the days when your sleep is most disrupted, or in the week after a particularly intense hot flash, the chaos starts to organize itself. It becomes predictable, and predictability is the natural antidote to anxiety. Third, move your body, not as punishment, not as another obligation on an already overwhelming to-do list, but as a direct neurochemical intervention. Physical movement increases GABA production, the same calming neurotransmitter that your declining estrogen is failing to support. It releases endorphins. It regulates cortisol. 30 minutes of walking, not running, not high-intensity training, just walking, can produce an anxiolytic effect comparable to a low dose of medication. Your body is asking for movement not because you need to lose weight or look different, but because your brain literally needs the chemical input that movement provides. Fourth, protect your sleep with the ferocity of someone guarding something precious, because you are. Sleep is when your brain consolidates emotional memories, processes stress, and restores neurochemical balance. When perimenopause disrupts your sleep, through night sweats, cortisol spikes, or the cruel insomnia that wakes you at 3 a.m. with a racing heart, it creates a feedback loop that makes every other symptom worse. Anxiety worsens sleep. Poor sleep worsens anxiety. Breaking this cycle, even imperfectly, is one of the most important things you can do for yourself during this transition. And I want to be honest with you about something. After working with so many women going through this exact experience, I realized that information alone wasn't enough. Women needed something they could actually apply, something practical that works with their body's changes rather than against them. That's why I put together something specifically for this. You'll find it in the pinned comment and in the first link below this video. I'm not saying it will fix everything overnight. I'm saying it could be the missing piece that finally makes this transition feel navigable instead of terrifying. Fifth, and this is perhaps the most important, talk about it. Say the words out loud. Tell your partner, "I am going through a hormonal transition and it's affecting my brain chemistry. The anxiety I feel is real, it is physical, and I need your patience." Tell your friends. Tell your sisters, tell your daughters. Because every woman who speaks about this openly breaks one more link in the chain of silence that has kept generations of women suffering alone, convinced that they were the only ones, convinced that they were failing at something everyone else seemed to handle effortlessly. They weren't handling it effortlessly. They were hiding it, just like you've been hiding it. I think about Karen often, the woman who said she was afraid of everything and nothing at the same time. I saw her again recently, nearly 2 years after that first conversation. She looked different, not younger, not magically transformed, but present, grounded. She told me the anxiety hadn't disappeared entirely. It still visited sometimes, especially around hormonal fluctuations. But its power had changed. It no longer defined her days. It no longer controlled her decisions. She knew what it was now. She knew where it came from. She knew it would pass. And that knowledge, that simple, hard-won understanding, had given her back something she thought she'd lost forever, herself. That is what I want for you. Not a world without anxiety, not some impossible promise of eternal calm, but understanding, clarity, the ability to look at what's happening inside you and say, I see you, I know what you are, and you don't get to run my life. Perimenopause is not a disease. It is not a disorder. It is a transition, the most significant biological transition since puberty. And it deserves to be met with the same level of preparation, education, and support. The fact that it isn't is not your failure. It is a systemic one. And every time a woman learns what's really going on inside her body, every time she refuses to accept a diagnosis that doesn't fit, every time she stands in a room and says, "This is hormonal and I deserve to be heard," that system gets a little less powerful. You are not too old to feel like yourself again. You are not too far gone to find your way back. You are standing in the middle of a storm that has a beginning and an end, and the bravest thing you can do is stay standing. If this video helped you understand something you've been struggling with, if it gave a name to something that has been nameless, then subscribe to this channel. Not for me, for the woman you'll be 6 months from now, who will need the next piece of this puzzle. Share this with someone who's going through it, a friend, a sister, a colleague who confided in you over coffee that she just doesn't feel like herself anymore. She needs to hear this and keep coming back, because this conversation is only beginning and there is so much more to uncover. You deserve answers, and you always did.